Data science has been becoming a growing profession and is also the heart of many organizations. That's why Data Science Portugal was born. The first community created by data scientists for data scientists. DSPT wants to gather anyone who works in the field and chat about any topic over this great subject. All members from our team are committed to make sure that the data science field evolves in a healthier and stronger way. To ensure that the focus is on sharing knowledge, we guarantee that our stage is not a place that supports any commercial or recruitment content, and our kind speakers are committed to share their experience for free. We want you. Let's do bigger things together. Join us at any event all around Portugal or online.
Hello. Today we have a very special presentation that addresses a very important topic called fairness in machine learning. It will be presented by André Cruz, and I'll be doing a formal presentation in a slide after. This is our 83rd meetup, still in webinar form due to the ongoing pandemic. The agenda for today is opening meeting, so you have to hear me for 15 minutes. Then André Cruz will present what was his master dissertation, Fairness Web Hyperparameter Optimization. It is a very interesting topic that is being currently exploited and investigated. After we have Q&A and the closing session. The Q&A, as the last meetup, will be then based on your comments in YouTube. You don't need any other platform. You just write your questions in the YouTube chat, and the team will then make it reach the StreamYard platform and then reach the André. As you can see in the video, our mission is to share knowledge and share data science knowledge with all the community. Can you be either you being a beginner or a professional in this area? We uphold this philosophy. We want to open events. We want events where you are able to share knowledge and gather knowledge from people that are more experienced than you. We do not like to shameless promotion or trying to hire people or sell your product in our stage. We are currently residing in 5 cities: Aveiro, Braga, Coimbra, Lisbon, in Porto. The physical meetups are on hold currently and probably for some time, but we'll still invest doing our webinars and online events to keep the community together. You can reach us by datascienceportugal.com, is our main repository or main website, but we also are present in Slack, Facebook, Meetup, and LinkedIn. If you want closed real-time access to any of the members, please use Slack. It's the default platform for real-time communication with any member of the team. So if you want to have any question, you want to post jobs, you want to find something, please use Slack. It's the most direct means of communication with us. So join us in any of our social media accounts. And we want to thank NOS for sponsoring this webinar. Again, we have a call for proposals. So if you have done something worthwhile in machine learning, or you know someone that has been done an interesting job in this area, please fill out our form and we'll evaluate your admissions formality and see if you will be fit for a future meetup or webinar with us. As stated, the Q&A will be based on YouTube chat. Just post your questions on YouTube chat. We'll gather them and then make them reach André. First of all, I want to thank André for being available to do this presentation. Currently, he's a data scientist at Vidzai. He has researching fair models in machine learning, and he has won the IEEE Outstanding Master Dissertation Awards with his master dissertation work, and he will present that thing today. Thank you for being here. So he'll present fairness-aware hyperparameter optimization.
Okay.
You can begin.
So I guess I'll start. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, Mario. So hi, thank you all for being here. I'll be presenting our work on fairness-aware hyperparameter optimization. This work was mostly done, it's mostly based on my master thesis done at PhilP while interning at Vidzai, and under supervision of Pedro Soleiro and Carlos Schwartz. So we'll start with our motivation. As you know, machine learning has had an increasingly pervasive impact in our daily lives. And at the same time, we've witnessed widespread reports of machine bias in real-world systems, from gender bias in CV screening tools to racial bias in recidivism assessment to gender bias in mortgage lending, student loans, consumer credit, among others. And regarding the scientific community, although interest has peaked in the last couple of years, the current machine learning landscape still lacks practical methodologies and tools for real-world practitioners. And current bias mitigation methods are often metric and model-dependent and invariably imply added complexity in current ML pipelines. But first, before we go any further, let's take a close look at this plot that illustrates our problem. So this is a plot of the fairness accuracy trade-off on a well-known dataset from the fairness literature, the adult dataset. And we have a couple of key insights that stand out. The first of which is that we have a strong inverse relation between fairness and precision and predictive accuracy, which is the case in almost any real-world dataset. So we have a trade-off between fairness and accuracy. You can have both. You can't have both. And this leads us to the second insight, which is that if we target only performance, which is common practice, common ML practice, if we target only performance, we are unknowingly targeting unfair models, which is this region marked in red. So if we don't evaluate fairness, we are unknowingly targeting unfair models. And the third key insight is that, as we can see, a small decrease in performance can actually bring us a very large increase in fairness. So our objective is to target this model marked with a B. It's an optimal trade-off between fairness and accuracy, as are all of these models in the curve, instead of targeting the model marked with an A, which is the best performing model, but which is quite unfair. So what is our objective? As I said, we aim to enable model development that achieves good fairness utility trade-offs. Our method should be model and metric agnostic, and it should be easily introduced into current ML pipelines. It should work out of the box, and alternatively enable targeting specific trade-offs. And we also aim to study the fairness utility trade-off on a real-world case study. And how will we do this? Well, as the title of the talk suggests, we will integrate fairness awareness into the hyperparameter optimization process by guiding the search towards fairer regions of hyperparameter space. As a method of black box optimization, it is naturally inherently model and metric agnostic, and it's already part of most real-world ML pipelines, so there's a potential to introduce fairness at no extra cost or effort. But first, let's again stop to scope our project by defining what hyperparameters actually are. So when we talk about hyperparameters, we usually mean model hyperparameters. And these are the number of estimators of a light GBM model or random forest, or the learning rate or number of layers of a neural network, for instance. But actually, we also have, for instance, the model type. So the choice between whether we want to use like GBM, random forest, neural network, or any other model, that choice is a hyperparameter itself. And we also have, for instance, the sampling hyperparameters. So whether we want to use undersampling, oversampling, or to which degree, that's a hyperparameter as well. So what we want to emphasize is the insight that any decision available to the data scientist is a hyperparameter. And any of these hyperparameters influences performance, but they also influence fairness. So it seems fertile ground to tackle fairness awareness and fair model development through hyperparameter optimization. Moving on to the related work. And if we want to tackle algorithmic bias, if we want to promote fairness, we must first define it. And algorithmic bias is generally defined as disparate error rates among individuals from different subgroups. So, for instance, if we have a hypothetical ML-powered social security program, it should successfully find individuals in need of assistance, these are true positives, in equal rates among different ethnicities or genders. So this is equal true positive rates. And bias reduction techniques in the literature often work by attempting to balance these error rates. So in this case, it would balance true positive rates. So popular fairness metrics in the literature include equalized odds, which is equal true positive rates and equal false positive rates among subgroups. We also have equal opportunity, which is, as we saw, equal true positive rates. What does this mean? For instance, if we have two qualified applicants applying for a job, they are both qualified, so they are both labeled positive. If one is female and one is male, they both should have the same likelihood of getting that job. So there should be the same true positive rate independently of whether that person is male or female or any other protected attributes. But essentially, any aggregate of a group-based metric can be taken to define fairness, and it is highly task-dependent. Regarding bias mitigation methods, numerous methods have been proposed in literature, and these are often divided into one of three families. So starting off with preprocessing algorithms. Preprocessing algorithms attempt to tackle bias in the data, in the input data fed to the model. And a well-known example is that of learned feather representations. This algorithm attempts to learn a new intermediate representation in which you shouldn't be able to predict the sensitive attribute from this representation, but you should be able to predict the label. So it learns a new representation, a new data set, and the objective is that the error rate for you to predict the person's gender, for instance, should be maximal, and the error rate for the label, should that person get the job or not, should be minimal, as usual. We also have in-processing algorithms, and these algorithms attempt to tackle bias in the training process of the model itself. And examples include regularization or constraint optimization. And finally, we have post-processing algorithms. And examples include threshold calibration and information withholding. Threshold calibration is a very simple method, quite efficient in practice, which is essentially setting a different threshold per group. And if we have a different decision threshold per group, we can trivially equalize true positive rates. We can select different points on the ROC curve and equalize true positive rates. However, preprocessing methods can't actually guarantee fairness in the end model because they act in the beginning of the ML pipeline. In-processing methods are metric dependent and model dependent, which means they're often non-existent for numerous algorithms, for instance, like GBM. And post-processing methods are inherently suboptimal because it is akin to knowingly training a biased model. The model learns a biased decision-making process, and afterwards we're trying to correct its outputs. So by this point in the ML pipeline, we can only lose information. So all methods invariably introduce complexity into real-world ML pipelines. And therefore, we use none of these approaches, and instead take a different approach, so the approach of hyperparameter optimization. So hyperparameter optimization, there are several known algorithms for hyperparameter optimization, from the traditional methods to the more recent resource-aware methods. And starting off with random and grid search, these are one of the most common in practice, and they are the simplest, but predictably they're not the most efficient. Grid search essentially samples hyperparameter configurations on a grid, and random search randomly samples hyperparameter configurations from a given space until the budget is exhausted. Importantly, random search tends to outperform grid search because instead of sampling the same hyperparameter values over and over while varying a single hyperparameter dimension, random search instead randomly samples all hyperparameter values, so it ends up trying a much larger number of different hyperparameter values and tends to converge to a better optimum. Next up, we have Bayes optimization. Bayes optimization is a framework for model-based optimization of black box functions. It's a framework because it is not a specific algorithm. It's more of a recipe of how to optimize a function. Model-based because it builds a model of the underlying objective function that we're trying to predict, that we're trying to maximize. And black box because we make no assumptions on the underlying function. We don't derive it. We just look at its outputs. And Bayes optimization does tend to outperform both random and grid search. However, it has a couple key disadvantages. First of which is that it can't really handle, at least vanilla Bayes optimization based on Gaussian processes can't really handle categorical hyperparameters or conditional hyperparameter spaces. And also it's resource blind. So unlike the methods that we'll see further ahead, it has no concept of a training budget. It just trains all algorithms from beginning to end. And this leads us to successive halving and the multi-armed bandit setting. So in this setting, we have a fixed amount of resources that must be allocated between competing choices in a way that maximizes expected gain. And this name actually comes from a gambler standing in front of a row of slot machines. Each slot machine is sometimes called a one-armed bandit. And we have to decide which arms should we pull in order to maximize our expected profit. This is the multi-armed bandit setting, and successive halving is based on a simple concept that of low fidelity approximations of a model's performance on a fraction of the budget. So we start off with n randomly sampled hyperparameter configurations. We train all of them on a fraction of the total budget, in this case around 12%. And we discard the worst half and double the budget for the remaining ones, and discard the worst half and double the budget and discard the worst half until a single configuration is trained on 100% of the training budget. So as I said, this algorithm is quite efficient in practice, but it does lead us to a question, which is, should we sample a very large number of hyperparameter configurations for a given budget? So we have the cluster for a day. For that day, should we try 1,000 different hyperparameter configurations, and thus each one will be trained on a lower budget? Or should we try a lower number of configurations, maybe 100, and each one will be trained on average on 10 times the budget? So actually, there is no answer to this question. This is an instance of a well-known trade-off in AI, which is the exploration-exploitation trade-off. And it depends on the task and the data set, and thus Hyperband was proposed. It essentially tackles this exploration-exploitation trade-off by running a grid search over the hyperparameters of successive halving. So it starts off with highly exploratory rounds and ends with more exploitation, rounds of more exploitation. And we'll see this in detail further ahead. So moving on to our proposed methods, Fairband. And again, first, let's take a brief pause to examine 3 fairness security trade-offs from real-world data sets. And what we see is that often these problems have a convex operator frontier. So this is quite nice, actually, because what this means is that we can actually find the optimal set of trade-offs simply by scalarizing the two objective functions. So if the problem is convex, which does tend to happen in practice, we can find all of the optimal trade-offs by scalarizing the two objective functions and varying the weights given to each objective function. So we simply introduce fairness as a goal in the objective metric. And the hypothesis that this relies on is that if model A represents a better fairness security trade-off than model B with a short training budget, then this distinction is likely to be maintained with a higher training budget. This is the hypothesis of using this objective function on a multi-armed bandit setting. Thus, we should select models based on both performance and fairness, how we scalarize both objective functions, weighted by this alpha parameter, which is the relative importance of performance. So Fairband is essentially built on top of successive halving and hyperband. It is model agnostic, metric agnostic, and has an efficient resource usage. And additionally, these methods are highly exploratory. So by using these methods, we actually sample 6 times more configurations than random search or Bayes optimization on an equal budget. And additionally, aiming for a completely out-of-the-box experience, we propose a heuristic for setting this value of alpha. We could select a value of alpha based on our specific task and domain knowledge, but we also propose this heuristic, which is guiding the value of alpha from the average difference between the fairness, the model fairness and performance seen so far on the optimization process. So what this heuristic does in practice is that if we have a very high fairness of models seen so far and very low performance, we want to use a higher value of alpha and thus promote higher performance. So in this region, we have higher values of alpha. The alpha is the relative importance of performance in the objective metric, so we promote performance. And this region, we have lower values of alpha because we have high performance and low fairness. We want to promote fairness. And this is the final Fairband algorithm. Its skeleton is basically that of hyperband, and in the inner loop, it's successive halving. The key differences are that we evaluate both accuracy and fairness. We set alpha using our proposed heuristic based on the historical fairness and accuracy seen so far. And we sort the models based on this scalarized objective function and select the top half or the top 1/3 of models to keep for the next round. And this can be more easily understood in this table. So this table explains the execution of Fairband. These brackets are actually based on those of hyperband. And these are 5 optimization brackets corresponding to different exploration trade-offs. So here in this end, we have 5 models trained on 100% of the budget. On this end, we have 81 models, 81 hyperparameter configurations, trained on only 1% of the budget, 1.2. These are the model discard iterations, the number of models, and the budget per model. So looking at the example of the bracket on the left, we start off with 81 configurations, each one trained on 1.2% of the budget. We keep the top third and discard 2/3. So instead of halving, we actually use the discard factor at a equals 3. So we keep the top third and discard 2/3. And with this, we triple the budget. So we keep the top third, triple the budget, and so on until a single configuration remains. And we do this for every instance of the exploration-exploitation trade-off. And an important note is that all of these different hyperparameter configurations, we actually have on this table, we actually have 143 different hyperparameter configurations, 81 plus 34 plus 15 plus 8.5. And we train a total of 206 different models, but this whole table only uses the equivalent budget of training 24 models from beginning to end. So this uses 2,400 budget units, the equivalent of 24 models from beginning to end, but it tries off 143 different hyperparameter configurations. So these bandit-based settings are quite efficient in practice, quite exploratory. So moving on to our experimental setup, we experiment and show results on 3 benchmark datasets from the fairness literature: donor shoes, adult census, and compass. And we also use a large-scale real-world case study on account opening fraud, which is an in-house feeds-eye dataset. Starting off with the donor shoes dataset, the aim of this dataset is to identify projects for K-12 schools at risk of getting underfunded to provide a tailored intervention for those projects. So a positive prediction in this model on this dataset means that that specific project will get additional aid. So a positive prediction is a good thing in this setting. So the setting is assistive. Usually these tasks, when we're considering fairness, are divided between assistive or punitive, depending on whether a positive prediction is a good thing or a bad thing for the target of the prediction. So in this case, it's a good thing, clearly. So the setting is assistive, and the fairness will be defined as balanced true positive rates. And the sensitive attribute is the poverty level of the school, from low poverty to high poverty. Next up, we have the adult census dataset. This is data from the 94 US census. We have demographics data and, for instance, capital gains data. The aim is to identify low-income individuals at need of assistance from a hypothetical social security program. So a positive prediction means that that specific individual will get extra aid. So it's, again, an assistive setting. And the fairness metric will be balanced through positive rates. And in this case, the sensitive attribute is gender. Moving on to the compass datasets. This dataset is a well-known dataset from the fairness literature. The objective is to predict recidivism based on that person's criminal history. So we want to predict whether a defendant will reoffend in the next couple of years. So a positive prediction actually means that that defendant will be labeled as at high risk of reoffending. And what this means in practice is that he might not be able to be released on bail, for instance. So this is an example of a clearly punitive setting. A positive prediction is a negative outcome for the defendant. So it's a punitive setting, so we are worried about the false positive rate. So what does a false positive mean in this setting? Again, a positive means that that defendant will be labeled at high risk. A false positive means that someone that actually will not reoffend in the next couple of years. So someone that could be reintroduced into society, could be released on bail, will be wrongly kept in jail because of a false positive from this risk, from this ML model. So we want to make sure that this false positive rate isn't disproportionately hurting individuals based on their gender or based on their ethnicity. In this case, the sensitive attribute is race. And finally, we have the EOF dataset, which is based on a case study on online bank account opening fraud. This is a real-world case study, so it's actually extremely imbalanced. This will be important further ahead. And a positive prediction means that that applicant, that is someone that is trying to open a bank account, will be labeled as fraudulent. So he won't be allowed to open a bank account. And a false positive in this case means that someone that is not fraudulent, a genuine application to open a bank account, a regular person will be denied this bank account opening unjustly. So these are false positives. Again, this is a punitive setting, and we want to target balanced false positive rates. In this case, the sensitive attribute is age. And this is the overview of the 4 datasets that we experiment on. And for the search space, we use different model types as hyperparameters. We use different model hyperparameters. And only for the AOF dataset, we also use undersampling because we actually needed to increase performance because of the high class imbalance. So moving on to the results. And again, brief pause in the beginning of this section to take a look at the fairness utility trade-off. These are 48,000 moles plotted on a performance axis. So as you can see, random forest and LightGBM seem to have a very good performance and seem almost indistinguishable from each other. And decision trees and logistic regression seem to have a very low performance, and that's it. So random forest and LightGBM seem to be great. But actually, if we unfold this second dimension of fairness, so if we don't pay attention only to performance, if we pay attention also to this fairness dimension, we can see that actually, for instance, decision trees have a low performance, but they're actually quite fairer. And LightGBM versus random forest, for instance, LightGBM tends to be fairer in this setting. In this specific case study, LightGBM tends to be a lot fairer than random forest for the same performance. So it is possible to achieve substantial differences in fairness for the same performance, as we can see from drawing a vertical line in these plots for the same performance. If we didn't evaluate fairness, if we were fairness blind, we could get a mole on this point, for instance, and for the same performance, we have a mole with the same performance but much higher fairness. So it is possible. Now it's just a question of guiding the search. And this leads us to the results of FairBand. So this is a plot of the selected models on the adult dataset and the AOF dataset. On the left is adult, on the right is AOF. And as we can see, FairBand correctly picks models on the kind of elbow of the curve for the adult dataset, while random search and Hyperband pick the high-performing models but unfair models. And for AOF, the difference is actually more significant, because performance difference between FairBand and random search and Hyperband is not that different, but in fairness, it is quite different. These are plots of the density of Pareto optimal models on each of the FairBand iterations. So as we discard models, so here, as you recall, we had 81 different hyperparameter configurations. And as we discard models, so 27, 11, etc., as we discard models, we want to increase the density of Pareto optimal models. And that will mean that our search strategy is actually doing something. And that's what we see in practice. So in the last iteration, the density of Pareto optimal models is quite high. And these are the actual numerical results of running FairBand versus the random search and Hyperband. And we also compare to FairBand to using random search with an alpha equals 0.5. So this random search actually has the scalarized objective function as well. And we'll take a look at this table further ahead in further detail. It's quite large, so I'll skip to the summary, which is the comparison of FairBand versus Hyperband. This FB auto is FairBand with our proposed heuristic versus Hyperband, and what we see is that on average we have an absolute difference in performance and a relative difference in performance. So performance decreases slightly, but actually fairness increases a lot. And this difference in relative terms is actually quite more significant because performance is actually already quite high. So if we drop performance from 97 to 90, it's not that significant. But if we increase fairness from 50 to 90%, which is the 100% increase, if 50 from 50 to 100%, it will be a 100% increase. That is quite significant, and that's what we see in practice. We have essentially giant increases in fairness with a small performance cost. And finally, we also did an experiment of introducing a traditional bias reduction method from the literature, which is this EG. So besides all of the other traditional models, like GBM, logistic regression, neural network, random forest, and decision trees, we also added this exponentiated gradient reduction method, which is a well-known bias reduction method. So this method specifically targets increases in fairness. And all of the other methods are considered fairness blind. And what we see in practice is that by adding this option, allowing Fairband to choose this method, most of the time it actually chooses not to use that model, and it actually chooses fairness blind methods. So the takeaway here is that first, a neural network with the right hyperparameter configurations can actually mean a much improved fairness utility trade-off when compared to methods specifically tailored towards fairness. But overall, we should include both fairness-aware methods and fairness and traditional methods in our search space, and just let the algorithm do its thing and find the best trade-offs. And this is a quick overview of the results in practice from that large table that we saw earlier. So for each data set, we actually have examples of the models selected by Hyperband and those selected by Fairband. So for instance, for donors choose, we had a model with very high precision, 60%, but actually it had a true positive rate of 6% for low poverty schools, but a very low true positive rate for high poverty schools. So as you can see, this is quite unfair. So from proposing a project from a high poverty school, you'd have a very low chance of getting it funded, of getting extra aid. And the model selected by Fairband actually has a 93% higher true positive rate for K-12 schools projects on the high poverty scale. And for that, we pay a slight decrease in precision. And on all the other data sets, we can actually essentially see the results repeating. So on the adult data set, we have a 30% higher true positive rate. On the Compass data set, we have a 30% lower false positive rate for non-Caucasian individuals. So in this case, we could see that these false positive rates, Caucasian versus non-Caucasian, was quite different, quite distinct, and now they're balanced. What this means is that actually for every 10 false positives on the previous system, 10 people that were wrongly kept in jail, 3 of them on the new system can now rightly be released on bail, for instance. And on the AOF dataset, we again have a 30% lower false positive rate. So to conclude, a key takeaway, I'd say, is that by optimizing solely for performance, you are unknowingly targeting unfair models. We propose Fairband, an efficient method for multi-objective hyperparameter optimization. It is model agnostic, metric agnostic, and maximizes fairness among multiple subgroups. We propose a heuristic for setting this value of alpha, which is essentially a parameter-free Fairband. And we show state-of-the-art results, significantly improved fairness at small performance costs and no extra budget. And additionally, we demonstrate that hyperparameter optimization is indeed an effective way to navigate the fairness utility trade-off. Thank you. And you actually have links for the preprint on archive for my master thesis, and for all the plots and data are open source at GitHub. And thank you to all the authors.
Thank you for your presentation. It was quite interesting, and we have a couple of questions. But if anyone in the audience still wants to make a question, please do. We will try to incorporate it in the discussion. But for now, we have 7. And the first one is, it's written here: can fairness be found with other methods faster than exhaustive search?
So you can find fairer models with other methods. For instance, if we know that we want to target, fairer models, we could use, for instance, the traditional fairness-aware methods. For instance, this exponentiated gradient. It will find always quite fair model and you'll pay performance, but you don't know which method to use. That is the key problem. So there are dozens of methods out there in the literature. We use the single one for example, for comparison, but there are dozens of different pre-processing, in-processing, and post-processing algorithms for improving fairness. And the only way to know which one will give me the best fairness accuracy trade-off is an exhaustive search between all of those methods. An approximation to that exhaustive search is using these hyperparameter optimization methods, for instance, fair band.
Thank you. The second one is, how well do these methods scale comparative to deep learning?
Okay, so I'm not sure which methods that is referring to.
Let's assume the one that you have.
Okay. So fairband is a hyperparameter optimization method. So if we want to use hyperparameter optimization on top of a deep learning method, so it runs on top of those methods. If we want to use it on top of a deep learning method that is very large, it will consume proportionally more resources. So if we want to evaluate, for instance, if with these settings that we use in our experimental setup, we used for all of our optimization processes, we use the equivalent budget of training 24 models from beginning to end. So if we use 2 hours of compute training your deep learning method from beginning to end, you'd use 2 times 24. So
I think we understand that your method runs on top of these models. I have a follow-up question regarding this. Does the size of the network has a high impact on the on the delay of your fairband search model, or?
So the size of the network could have an influence on the time taken by fairband if we use a budget that doesn't depend on the size of the network. So for instance, if we use a budget that is time, wall clock time, then the size of the network won't matter. If we use a network that is twice the size, it won't train as far, but it will have the same wall clock time, and fairband will take the same overall to optimize. If we use a budget, if we consider a budget unit as 100 samples or 1% of the training data set, then yes, a network that is twice the size will take longer to optimize. So fairband will take longer by proxy.
It depends if you consider the budget as real time or epochs.
Yes, exactly.
That raises another question, at least for me. That is, let's assume that we use real time. So let's say we train a model for 5 minutes, for example. If the network is quite complex, these 5 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 epochs, and you don't see probably great changes in the hyperparameters that compute the network. And can your search algorithm fail because the models don't have enough time to converge a little bit? So the first guess is so wrong, but they don't have time to converge. Can you lose a lot of your models, or all your models can diverge in the end of the process of the search?
Yes, so that is exactly one of the problems that Hyperparameter tries to solve. So in this successive halving setting, not sure if I could get the slides up there.
Yes, please.
So basically, in this successive halving setting, that's the exact problem. So is this budget, this first budget, sufficient to distinguish these hyperparameter configurations? If this first budget is too small, if we train them on a single sample, it obviously won't be sufficient to distinguish whether this one is better than this one. If we train them on 1,000 samples, then that may be sufficient. But where is the line? So again, there is no answer to this question. We don't actually know what is a sufficient budget to distinguish this hyperparameter configuration, and that can happen. And that's why we use hyperband instead of successive halving, which is this table in which we have, for instance, a very high number of configurations trained on a low budget, but we also experiment with a lower budget configurations trained on a lower number of configurations trained on a higher budget. So if this budget is not sufficient to distinguish these configurations, then this bracket will not lead to good results, but this bracket may lead to better results. If this is still not sufficient, then this bracket will lead to better results, and so on. So this is the problem. This is exactly the problem that Hyperparameter tries to solve, and that's a really good question.
Thank you. The next one, you combine both your objective functions in a single function. Will you consider a model where you optimize it and alternating, probably?
Yes.
Expect maximization for probabilities where you swap.
Yes. I'm not sure if that will lead to a kind of catastrophic forgetting between optimization. So optimize towards one end. These are trade-offs. So if we would optimize towards performance, and then we will optimize towards fairness and worsen performance, and then optimize towards the other, maybe that could work. I've never experienced with it. Maybe in I don't know. Maybe it could work. We have to try.
You have a new idea to try and work.
Yeah, exactly.
If you are confined at home, you have something to do.
Yeah, thanks for the suggestion.
No problem. Fairness-aware ensemble algorithm. Is it possible?
So fairness-aware ensembles. I guess there's no reason. There's no reason why. There's no reason why it's not possible. I guess these are fairness-aware ensembles when we use fairband to optimize random forests. So, yeah, it's definitely possible.
I will go a step further. If you have an ensemble of algorithms, you usually have a weight for each algorithm that you are doing, similar to a voting system. Can fairness aware be added to that weight?
Yeah. So selecting the
used to improve ensemble algorithms in the way that all of them vote, but the vote also has in account how fair the algorithm is usually, and depending on the inputs, it can be said that based on this context, it needs to be fairer. Based on this context, you go to optimization, performance, or whatever.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, that sounds like another great suggestion. You could try to choose the weights, the overall weights, by maximizing, for instance, the scalarized objective function. Or you could try to train some models specifically towards performance and some models specifically towards fairness, and then weight their votes. I mean, yeah, sounds like a good idea.
Thank you. And another.
Should be taking notes.
You can see the video. You can see the replay. So don't worry about that. We still have 4 questions, and I want to remind the audience, if you want, you can make a question, and we'll try to incorporate in the discussion. Can fairness be modeled as an optimization problem, similar to gradient descent?
Yeah, so that's actually often difficult because the fairness metrics aren't usually differentiable. So we usually don't optimize recall. We optimize for minimizing the least squared errors, for instance, or minimizing cross entropy loss. And for fairness, we can't actually optimize balance through positive rates as a metric. but we can optimize. We can try to optimize proxy metrics. For instance, you can try to optimize. You can try to minimize the correlation between the predicted outcome and the sensitive attributes. You can try to. There are several proxy metrics towards fairness. So you can try to do it, but you can't do it exactly. And that is actually a couple of in-processing algorithms introduce a loss on the fairness metric based on the proxy of the fairness metric directly into the optimization process also. So we could learn neural networks by minimizing cross-entropy loss plus some regularization term on a fairness, on the proxy of a fairness metric.
It's funny you say that because I think you also replied to this question. Can fairness be added as a cost in the optimization algorithm similar to regularization?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly.
I think, yes, it's possible. The last two questions, unless someone wants to pose another one. Is fair band applicable to regression problems? Can regression be fair?
Yeah, that's another great question. I must say that I'm not. There's definitely research on fair regression. Usually, I'm not actually that informed into it, but usually, in these fairness metrics, all of these fairness metrics that we saw, you need a binary outcome to know whether the false positive rate, for instance, will be disparate. But there is definitely research on fairness regression. I'm just not that informed into it. But regarding the question, so fair band, it's completely agnostic towards your task. So as long as you give it a metric, a performance metric, and a fairness metric to optimize, if that fairness metric is a fair regression problem and that performance metric is a regression metric, then sure, it could be applied.
And the last one, do you think that in the future, people, researchers, business will put more effort into finding fairer algorithms instead of the most performant one in terms of accuracy, precision, etc.? Feels
So,
like a question for last.
Yeah, very good question. So yeah, I think this is more of opinion based, but I think eventually we may be all forced to look at fairness. So right now, if we want to put an ML model in production, you only optimize performance. But I think that it is likely that in the following decade or in the following couple of years, there will be legislation to tell you that the maximum disparate error rate, for instance, between African Americans and Caucasians, or non-Caucasian and Caucasians, or males and females, this can be at most 80% of the other error rate, for instance. So I think that eventually this will be put into legislation, and that will make everyone kind of be forced to pay attention. So eventually we'll have to take fairness into account.
So you only think that only if there is regulation, people will be interested in fairness. Until regulation, you just want the most performant algorithm?
Right. Well, hopefully not. But if a company has the option of having a more performant model that will, in the end, mean more profit, I'm not sure if they'll choose the less performant model that is more fair.
Maybe to convince them that a fair model will reach more people, not only Caucasian male. Yeah,
definitely. And maybe they could take into account the negative press, for instance, of the recent Apple Card and Goldman Sachs problem, which we don't really know if it was a problem, but it was definitely negative press on both Apple and Goldman Sachs.
So there are no more questions. I want to thank you for your presentation and the discussion. It was really interesting, and I, for myself, I'm quite grateful that someone is trying to research these kind of questions and trying to make machine learning more fair and takes that into account. So thank you. Before we finish, my slides. Thank you. So before we finish, I want to remind you all that we have a call for proposals. If you have done any type of work that you think that is useful to be presented in this medium, in follow-up webinars, please fill up our formulary, and we'll try to evaluate your work and try to find a slot for you to present your work. Finally, we want you to fill a survey. Please fill it as honest as possible. We want your honest feedback regarding this type of events. We are still trying to do the best we can with the current situation, and based on the recent news, the current situation will maintain the status quo for now. So please give us your honest feedback. We want to try to make better events. They will remain online for now, but we want to make them as interactive as possible. We want to try to reach to the whole community, bring interesting topics, so you are still interested in this community. And finally, I want to thank you all for being here to listen to our webinar, to making questions, to discuss, and to be a little bit, to spend a little bit of time with us. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next webinar.